Hi everyone, I'm Sally Quinn. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Psychology at the University of York. I teach on social psychology in Year 2 and I support academic skills across the whole of the degree course. I also have an advanced module on cyber psychology, and that's where I'm going to talk to you today on social media and mental health. So first of all, I want you to have a think about yourself whether you think social media causes poor mental health. And I've given you 4 options below. So you either think yes, social media does cause poor mental health, no, you're not sure, or good old Facebook relationship status, it's complicated. So have a quick think about that, select one of those options, and then I'll carry on with the rest of the talk. We're going to keep coming back to this question as well, so you can change your mind if you want to later on in the talk. So first of all, let's have a look at this article in the Guardian newspaper. So it's from a pretty reputable newspaper. The title suggests that there's this link between depression and higher use of social media. There is some evidence in the main body of the article that they have based this story on research. So they're using research suggests. They've got a direct quote from the professor who carried out this study as well. So reading that article, you would think, yes, there is this link between depression and high use of social media. So let's have a look at the actual data from the study then. So this study actually was taken from the Millennium Cohort Study, and this was with 10,904 participants. So this is a really big study with lots and lots of participants in it. Their social media use was measured, asking them, on a normal week during term time, how long would you normally spend on social media apps? So along the x-axis of this figure, you can see the different options that participants were able to select for that answer. They also asked their participants to complete a depression measure, and the higher their score on this depression measure, the higher their levels of depression. So as part of this depression measure, they gave them a list of 13 symptoms and asked them, how often have you felt like this over the last 2 weeks? So an example would be, how often have you felt you were no good anymore? So a higher score is a higher level of depression. So what we can see in this figure is that the pale blue bars represent the males and the dark blue bars represent the females. So what we can see then is that for the females, you can see this steady increase across the time spent on social media in terms of depression. So what that means is that the longer time girls spend on social media, the more likely they are to have a higher depression score. So this pattern isn't so obvious for boys. What they found was that there was only a statistical significance between the 1 to 3 hours group and the 3 to 5 hours group, and then a significance between the 3 to 5 hours group and the 5 hours group. So in other words, this group here was significantly lower than this group here, and this group here was significantly lower than this group here. So for males, it only seems to be a difference at this very high end here, whereas for females, it is significant right the way across. So each of these dark blue lines, each of them is a significant increase from the previous. So what I want you to do now is think, okay, let's go back to this question again. Do you think social media causes poor mental health? So has this evidence changed your mind? Sometimes you might be a bit sceptical of newspaper articles, but I've just gone through the actual data with you from that paper. So have a think. Do you think social media causes poor mental health? Have you changed your mind from the first time I asked you that question? Okay, so let's move on. Now, there are things that we might need to consider. Maybe there isn't just this direct relationship between social media use and poor mental health like depression. Maybe there's stuff going on in between these two things that we need to think about. And in statistical language, we call these mediators. So as you'll see now on the screen, I've got this social media use on the left, depression on the right, and an arrow going between the two. Now when I said, are there other factors that we need to consider? There are things like sleep, whether we get harassed when we're online, whether or not being online has a relationship with our self-esteem and our body image. So in other words, when we think about mediators or these things that are going on in between social media and depression, what we mean is, so the greater your social media use, the more likely you are to have poorer sleep and therefore more likely to have depression. And again, with online harassment, the higher social media use you have, you're more likely to be harassed online. Again, with the poor self-esteem, you're more likely to have poorer self-esteem, more likely to have poorer body image, and then each of these things are each related to higher levels of depression. So what this means is that it isn't just this direct link between social media use and depression, but there's possibly things that are going on in between. So social media use is having an impact on something else, which is then having an impact on depression scores. So these variables here that we can see in the middle, this poor sleep, online harassment and self-esteem and body image, these are the factors that the study that we've just looked at also looked at in their study. And what they found was that all 4 of these factors were indeed important factors to consider. And you'll notice that the black lines are all different widths. That is not an accident, it's intentional. So the stronger the relationship, the bigger the black lines. So what this suggests then is that social media use over here, when you've got high levels of this, it has quite a strong relationship to poor sleep, which in turn has quite a strong relationship to higher levels of depression. So it's important to think then that it's not just about direct relationships between social media use and poor mental health, but there are other factors that are going on in between these two things that we need to consider. So let's have a look at another study that used this same idea of things going on in between social media use and mental health. So again, this study looked at depression, but it's focused specifically on Instagram use. So the mediator that they looked at this time, so that factor that's going on in between these two things, was social comparison. So what they wanted to test was, if you used Instagram use more frequently, are you more likely to compare yourself socially to other people and therefore more likely to have higher levels of depression? So these pictures on the screen I'm showing you now are amongst the highest liked photographs that were posted on Instagram. And what you'll notice is that they're all of famous people. So many people who follow other people on Instagram, they're not people that they know in their day-to-day life. You know, they might be celebrities and everybody knows who they are, but they're not people that they know well. So what the authors wanted to test was, how does this relationship stand when people are only following strangers? And what they found was, the more strangers people followed, the more likely that relationship that I showed you, that triangle I showed you before, the more likely that was to be true. So what that means is, the higher your Instagram use, the more likely you will negatively compare yourselves socially to other people, and therefore you're more likely to have higher levels of depression. So it may be that then following a high number of strangers leads to this negative social comparison, because we're comparing to unobtainable lifestyles. So what you'll see is that those pictures there that I showed you, this glamorous, pretty, unachievable for most people kind of lifestyle. So together, what these two studies that we've already looked at would suggest is that there is a relationship between high social media use and poor mental health. Now, there is something I need you to bear in mind here. The two studies I've talked about so far, we can only say there is an association between social media use and depression. So only an association or a relationship between high social media use and poor mental health. What it cannot do is provide evidence of causality. So what we can't say is that social media use causes poor mental health. So for all we know, poor mental health might be driving high social media use. And indeed, there is this idea that depression could cause high social media use because people are trying to hide away from the real world. So they take refuge in the online world instead. And actually, some of the addiction literature have shown that if you give medication for depression, so give medication to treat the mental illness, then social media use kind of falls within the bounds of normal usage. So it's important then that we think about research design and how we're going to tackle questions and what kind of data it's going to give us and what conclusions we can draw from that data. So if we're wanting to test causality, or at least move towards being able to conclude whether one thing causes another, what we need to do is experiments where we can control certain variables, or do longitudinal design where we can collect data at several data points and compare the scores on different measures across time. So what we're going to do now is look at a study that used an experimental design. So this was one that was done in the lab, and this study here was by Teichmann and colleagues, and what they wanted to look at was the link between Instagram and body dissatisfaction. So what they did, they had 220 female students, and they wanted to know whether the type of image that they gave them to look at and the number of likes associated with that image would have an effect on body dissatisfaction and whether people compared themselves to others in terms of their appearance. So they had two factors that they wanted to look at, whether the type of image made a difference, but also the number of likes. So they gave their participants one of two different types of images, either an average image, this was an image of an average looking person, or they gave them a thin ideal image. They also then varied the number of likes. So they gave some of their participants an image that had a low number of likes, and then some an image with high number of likes. So they ended up with these four different groups, as you can see on the screen here. So group 1 was shown an average image with a low number of likes, group 2 the average image with high number of likes, group 3 the thin ideal image with low number of likes, and group 4 the thin ideal image with high number of likes. So they were shown 15 images of the type relevant to their group, and these were taken from Instagram. So these were actual pictures from Instagram, but they managed to manipulate the number of likes to reflect the different groups. So for the low number of likes, these likes varied between 1 and 10, but for the high likes conditions, this varied between 100 and 300. And then the participants did a questionnaire that measured their body dissatisfaction and their appearance comparison. So let's have a look at the results then. So here we've got a figure where the blue bars are the groups that were shown the average image, so low number of likes and high number of likes in dark blue and light blue respectively. And then the groups who saw the thin image, their results are shown in the green bars. And again, the low number of likes and the high number of likes are separated there as well. So this figure here shows the results for the body dissatisfaction score. So this on the y-axis is the average score for this. Now what the results showed was that participants who saw the thin ideal image had higher levels of body dissatisfaction regardless of the number of likes. So what this means is that when we compare the average of these two blue bars to the average of these two green bars, so essentially comparing all those people who saw the average looking image compared to all of those who saw the thin looking image, the thin looking image participant groups had higher body dissatisfaction. So the number of likes had no relevance whatsoever. This figure here shows the similar results, but instead for appearance comparison. Okay, so again we see the same pattern, that those who saw the thin ideal image regardless of the number of likes had the higher appearance comparison. So what this study does show us is that looking at thin ideal images might make us feel bad about our bodies and make us compare ourselves to other people, specifically in terms of our appearance. But this study showed participants photographs of strangers, and that's not a true reflection of reality. We often also look at pictures that our friends have posted. And although this present study that I've just shown you shows that number of likes doesn't matter, there are other studies that have shown that when we're looking at content of our friends, the number of likes does have an impact on us. So what this is showing us is that it's building up a picture that it's not just the type of content that we look at that is important in terms of our mental health, but also who is posting it. So to further this idea that it's still not straightforward, let's have a look at a study that looked at the way in which we use social media and how that impacts on mental health. So this study here looked at how we post on social media and the link between that and loneliness. So what they did was they measured everybody's loneliness at one time point, so at time point 1. They then asked their participants to take part in a 7-day experiment. So as part of this experiment, participants were randomly allocated into one of two conditions. They were either in the experimental group, so in this experimental group they were asked to post more than they usually did on their social media. The other group was the control group, and they were told, just carry on with your normal social media use throughout this 7 days. And over that 7-day period, both groups were asked to complete a questionnaire that asked them questions about their happiness and their feelings of connection with their friends. And then at the end of the 7 days, both groups were then asked again to complete the loneliness measure that they completed at the beginning, so at time point 1. So let's have a look at the results of this study then. So you can see it from this graph, which is taken directly from the paper, that there are two lines here. The light grey line here is the control condition and the black line is the experimental condition. And on the x-axis we've got pre-interventions, this is a time point 1, and the post-intervention time point 2. So before and after that 7-day experimental period. And then the y-axis here shows the loneliness scores. So obviously higher the score, the higher the level of loneliness. So what you'll see is across the 2 time points, the control condition, their loneliness scores don't change at all because that line is flat. For the experimental condition, however, their loneliness scores decrease, and this line, the slope of this line, what we call the slope of the line, is a significant decrease. So what that means is that the experimental group, who were asked to post more frequently than they usually did, they had significantly lower levels of loneliness at time point 2 compared to the control condition. So this would suggest then, if people post more on social media, this is actually a good thing, that it actually helps with their mental health. So you'll remember that I said that during that 7-day period, the experimenters also collected data on feelings of connectedness as well. And the researchers hypothesized that maybe these lower levels of loneliness from the experimental group at time point 2 were related to higher feelings of connectedness to their friends during the week. So in other words, feelings of connectedness mediated the relationship between posting more on social media and loneliness. And indeed they found this relationship to be significant. So what this means is that the more people posted on social media, the higher their feelings of connectedness was during those 7 days, and therefore at the end of the 7 days, the lower their levels of loneliness. So this shows then, a 2 time point experiment, that there is a relationship between posting more on social media and lower levels of loneliness. And the reason that this relationship exists is because this posting more frequently makes people feel like they're more connected to other people. And indeed, other studies have found these kinds of relationships. So it's not just as simple as being on social media does or doesn't affect our mental health, we've also got in now this idea that it depends what we're actually doing on the site. And indeed other studies, albeit those that have only used correlational data, have found that if you actively engage in social media, so actually talking to people, commenting on their content, etc., then this is linked to lower depression. So what I want you to do now is, the last time I'm going to ask you this question is now, what do you think about this link between social media and poor mental health? Or do you think social media causes poor mental health? Now, if we think about whether social media causes poor mental health, those people who have finally landed on option D, it's complicated, then you're probably going down the right path. So just to conclude and bring this all together then, so there may be this link between social media and mental health, but if we're thinking about causality, it's very difficult to come to very firm conclusions. There is very limited evidence that can suggest causality, so very limited number of studies that have used experimental design or longitudinal design. There are other factors that we need to take into account as well, so those mediators that we've talked about, those things that are going on in between social media use and depression, so things like sleep. There's also the different types of activities that we're doing online. So are we browsing or are we actively engaging? What type of content are we looking at? Who's posted that content? And then lastly, all of these relationships that we look at where this relationship between social media use and very poor mental health, they're usually only associated with very high levels. So again, we need to be very careful about making very firm conclusions that social media use causes mental health. So in summary, it's complicated. So well done to those of you who came to that conclusion at the end, or whether you were there right at the beginning, but well done nonetheless. So I hope that's been of some interest to you, and if you do end up coming to York, I look forward to meeting you all in the new academic year.